that you have come and learned a little bit more about some instructional design as it comes to AI. What we do is at the end of each webinars, we have a link to a survey, and then that survey really inspires us to what we want to do next. So at the end of this webinar, we'd love for you to click it so you can give us some ideas about what you'd like to hear more about. Like I said, it inspires what we do. So before we get started, we like to kind of start the chat a little bit and just to kind of get the conversation flowing, get the juices thinking. But the thing I would want you to start thinking about is if you could think of one of your favorite assignments, in what ways has AI changed it for better or worse? Just think about, and it could be, your favorite ones. It's just like you're not willing to give it up. It's one of my favorite. And what ways has it changed for better, for good, or has it now made it a lot more challenging for you? So we'd love for you to put something in the chat box just to kind of get that thinking. I'll give you guys just a second to think about it. Okay. Thank you, Liza. I always appreciate it. You're always coming in and putting some thoughts. I appreciate that. So perfect. We've got some thoughts in here. I'd love for you guys to keep kind of building in what you're thinking of. Our presentations are usually done by AI Catalyst individuals, and then on the right side, you can see who is in charge. Joel is our fearless leader here. He really kind of, leads the direction and where we're going. He does a lot of remarkable things. He's a busy, busy man, and I so appreciate him. Today, the conversation is going to be led by myself. I teach at CSI. I teach in the education department. I teach future teachers. And our co-host, our co-presenter is going to be Nick. And Nick, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name's Nick Lambertson. I've been an instructor here for coming up on 2 years at CSI. I teach
Right.
is business and business communications and accounting, which is not necessarily my background. I do have an MBA, but my background's in sports medicine, and so I have kind of a unique situation as far as um, how I teach. My previous career was very hands-on and the education was very hands-on, so I kind of try to bring that into my classroom as well.
Nice. Yeah, the more hands-on we can get, the better, in my personal opinion as well. So just to give you guys some resources on these slides, and we'll share out the slides like we always do, but just to give you some ideas of past webinars. So if some of them look really interesting to you, maybe you didn't get a chance to see them. They're all linked up, and then you can have access to this one and all the ones in the past as well. So and today, what we want to do is we're going to focus on, so from those surveys from the last webinar, a lot of people talked about wanting to talk more about instructional design as it pertains to AI and what that might look like. And so what Nick and I are going to do is we're going to we're going to split this up, and I'm going to focus first just assessing your current climate, just the way that you're maybe talking about AI in your class or maybe not at all. And then how I went about redesigning an existing assignment, and Nick is going to talk about how he created a new assignment using AI. So we just wanted to give you some ideas, some thoughts, and to show you how we did it. I think a lot of these webinars, we get into the tools and they're really interesting, but sometimes we want to be asking ourselves, well, this is really great. How would I do something like that? What is the thinking process? And that's what we wanted to demonstrate in this webinar is our thinking process of how we went about redesigning some of our curriculum. So one thing, I use this as an AI image generating. Whenever I talk to my students about AI, they always talk about it as this elephant in the room that a lot of their faculty don't want to talk about, and that they find it to be rare that when somebody is very deliberate, they think it's almost like really like they're surprised by it. And I'm sure the people that are in this room are probably very transparent about AI. but I always like to first think about like before I redesign anything, I have to assess the climate of my own classroom. So what does that mean? And so one thing that I had to ask myself is, what does my college say about AI policy? And I think most of you are probably familiar with it, but has there been any kinds of changes in the AI policy, any kinds of updates since the last time you read it? That might be something that you might ask yourself to do before you go into any kind of redesign. And then I asked myself, well, what do I say about AI? Because at CSI, our policy is that it varies from faculty to faculty, it varies from class to class. And the whole intent is to give us autonomy to decide how much we use it. So, as you would imagine, that's going to be pretty difficult for students to navigate because from one class to another, the AI policy might be totally different. And then the question I would then ask is, are your views and the school's policy aligned, or are they kind of contradicting themselves, and to what capacity? Just to reaffirm that. And then lastly is the question I would always pose is, have I made my boundaries explicit for my class? So because at CSI, our policies vary from class to class, am I letting them know this is what I think is appropriate, this is what I don't think is appropriate? And I'm being very transparent because how can I hold them accountable to expectations that I've never set before? And so those are the things that I always like to first think about before I kind of go down the wormhole of wanting to fix anything. And so here's some check things or just question marks. And maybe you've already done all these things, but I always like to start off this way before we go in. And so the first question I have for you is, do you have an AI syllabus statement? And I don't mean the syllabus statement that is your college's, like your school's policy, but do you have your own views for your particular class listed in your syllabus? You know, are you explicit in what that means and what that looks like? And if you don't, you may want to consider adding some very specific language. And this might vary from class to class depending on what you're doing and to what degree. The next thing, and we've talked about this in webinar 2, is we talked about, have you tagged your assignment? So I have a statement in my syllabus about how I think about AI, why I think it's appropriate. And then on my assignments, I've decided to use some icons as a way to describe if if I think is appropriate or not. And so this is just another reminder to do the right thing, I guess I would say, is why I do this, is it's just another nudge to say, if it has this red cross, I really don't want you to do it. And I think they get used to the icons. And so then that almost becomes second nature. And so you may not want to do with all of your assignments, but perhaps the ones that you do want them to use AI, perhaps you then have like an AI icon that would then represent, if I have this icon, you can use it. But I think it's just another way of being consistent with our boundaries when it comes to our students. The next thing that I would recommend if you don't have it is, do you have like a resource page on your LMS platform? So what I did is I created just a couple pages for them about what I need them to know about AI, what the tags mean, and then getting started with some different tools. I created this resource page just because I can minimize fielding certain questions and I can again establish these boundaries really early on. So those are just some things that if you haven't already done it, I would really highly encourage you to do this just because it's really helpful for them. Again, if you want people to behave in a certain way with your expectations, are you being consistent and providing them enough venues to reinforce those expectations? And this last semester, I did something different. So I don't know about you guys, but we have to attend, like do attendance verification. And so one of mine, I went into my syllabus quiz and I asked two questions that I thought were really important. And the first one was I forced them to go look at understanding your assignment tags. And then I asked them, explain the difference between the two. And this part was really important because I can use their language if we have an academic integrity issue later on. So early on, I say, what's the difference between these things? Put it in your own words. And then if I see them using it in an icon where I said, I don't want you to use it, I use it as a conversation piece. And to instead of going immediately to punitive, I use it as a dialogue and I can hold them accountable to their own words. So that's one question that I added to my syllabus quiz. Real quick, real easy, didn't take me any time. And then the next question I added, and this was thanks to Kevin in one of our earlier webinars, was asking them about like how they use AI, to what capacity. So I had them click on one of my resource pages and I said, which tools are you familiar with and which have you never used? And from that one question, it influenced a lot of what I did in my classroom. First thing I realized just from this question is most of them were beginners. Most of them defaulted to ChatGPT. They did not use any other AI platform besides Claude. Most of them were like frequently were just citing ChatGPT. And they understood very little about different platforms. And so those answers influenced how I designed some learning experiences because in my mind, I thought they were using it more sophisticated than they were. And they were very like beginner level, to be honest with you. And so that was just some things I had to consider. So that's my little nudge just to think about how to set the scene before you then go into your course design. And when it comes to this, when we're thinking about instructional design,
A
really
comma
are going to be,
Lorlyn.
we're really going to be thinking about, if AI can generate decent answers, not great, but decent answers, and it begs to question then, what exactly are we designing students to do? Is the question that I had to ask myself, right? Like, what exactly am I having them to do? And so if you're thinking about your strongest assignment, the one that you liked, and ask yourself, like, does it measure compliance or does it measure thinking? What are you actually asking them? And in what ways has AI kind of taken over that? And so before I did anything, I kind of had to think about, what am I going to be grounding my assignments in? I want it to be real problems. I want them to focus on decision making. I want there to be reiterations of feedback and then them changing it based off that feedback. I want them to show me their thinking process throughout their whole experience. And so those are the things I wanted to think about before I then moved on to the next place. So what I did Okay, so what I did is, so that's kind of like the framework, that design learning is, what I was really thinking about. But before you go into an assignment and you want to go fix it immediately and you want to go into like creating a solution, I think we need to take a lot of time and to first evaluate and identify, is there really a problem in your assignment? Is it just like, sometimes you just have an interesting group of students that semester and it's just not going, or is there something going on with the design? And so my first thing is take a pause before you want to go fix everything and just first do an analysis to see, is there a problem with one of my major assignments? And I just want to show you that, like, I'm going to show you my thinking process from start to end. And it might look like a lot, but this whole thing took me about an hour and a half to do. So I really want to put that timestamp to let you know that this was not like a 10-hour ordeal that I went down the wormhole. It only took me about an hour and a half to do. And so to ground this example is for this webinar, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my classes as a way to kind of have that string of thought, as we go through each of the phases. And I'm going to use my class that's about like developmental and individual differences for future public teachers. So basically the class is about how does a human being develop from the course of like kindergarten to senior year, what's happening cognitively, physically, and the whole idea is like how do they teach in appropriate ways? And along the way, we learn about disabilities. And the whole idea with my major assignment is we go from talking about theory to a sense of application, right? And I want them to be able to then tell me like some effective teaching strategies that would help those students along the way. So this is what I'm going to share with you is my review stage before I did anything. I did not act. I just went in and I spent 20, 30 minutes reviewing before I go in. And so maybe as I'm showing you in the back of your mind, you're going to think about an assignment that you might want to review. Maybe that's coming up or maybe next semester. Perhaps it's like a scaffolded assignment that has multiple layers. Maybe that's one assignment that you're going to have in the back of your head as I'm talking. But the first thing I would try, this is my first exploration, I didn't do anything, is the first just evaluating the assignment as is. And I know all of us have heard this in webinars before. Just copy and paste your assignment and see what pops up. And I heard that so many times, but like how many of us actually have gone through the steps to do it? And then I would then say, maybe go a little step further, because most people will say, yeah, it's not producing what I want it to. It's not to the degree that I'm expecting. Then I would then say to you is, how long would it take for you to noodle with it until it does produce the performance you're looking for? So if you were to keep noodling with AI, did it take you 15 minutes? Did it take you 30 minutes to get to that point? But, going in and just going through the motions of it, I think is a first good attempt just to see what exactly am I trying to assess. And from this whole thing, I kept thinking like, I don't want them to be able to tell me which theory is an explanation. Like that's fine. That's basic level. But ultimately, what I wanted my students in this assignment to do is to demonstrate professional sound judgment. Professional judgment in a scenario. Like, what does this look like? I'm going to have to be in this classroom and I'm going to be having to make decisions all the time. How do I do that in a way that is going to be responsible? So that's my first try I would recommend before you do anything. My second try that I would recommend that you guys do is basically look at last semester's performance and see how that might influence the way you talk or design the assignment. And so what I did is I highlighted, I have the prompts for you if you want to copy and paste it when we have this webinar just to see. But basically, the orange parts is where you would go in with your own personalized information. So I first went in and basically said I should be able to say clearly what they should be able to know and be able to do as a result of this assignment. And I should be able to say it in a sentence or two. And then I went in and then I said, what was their actual performance, right? So what were they getting right? And we all can make that assessment. When you go through an assignment, you already have a pretty good idea of what they got right, what they got missing, and what you felt like was very like surface level lack depth. So I would put a few comments in there. And then I went in and talked about their behavior. Were there assignments that like they were predominantly late? I had, for me at the beginning, I had like 30% of my assignments were turned in late right away. And I thought, this is an interesting opportunity for me. Were there some confusion points? Did you get some emails, asking for clarifications? So I went in not only saying what they did, what they should be able to do, what their performance was, but the behavior along the way. And then I kind of saw what it spat out for me. And then I went, and then again, I would just, save it, open up a new chat box, and then start a new chat conversation. And the last one was about the language that I was using when it comes to this assignment. Were there some things that I was missing when it comes to the way I framed, the language that I used? And one big advice that I would give you is when you do these prompts, give them the audience details. I'm at a first year community college. These are going to be education majors. A lot of them are multi-language learners. They're first generation. I put some of those audience descriptors before I then ask, is there any ambiguous, vague language that I'm using? Are there some complex phrasing that might confuse my multi-language learners? I kind of probed and looked at my own self about the way I was talking about the assignment. And then I spat that out just to see what it basically produced for me. This whole experience of going in and just, copying and pasting my assignments, it took me about 30 minutes to do. So I just want to put that in there like a time frames for everybody. And based off these prompts, I printed them and then I reviewed the answers and I just compared. Like I didn't go in and try to like, manipulate the answer a little bit different, tweak it. I just saw what its initial response was. And I reflected on what I agreed and what I did not agree. I used my own sound judgment about it. I didn't just immediately go to fix it mode. I still took time to think about the responses that I got and to see if I actually agreed with them. I always view AI as a menu of suggestions, and I get to decide which ones I pick and which ones I modify from it. And from that inquiry, from that like exploration, I basically found that I had 3 points that I could integrate AI in some capacity that would maybe strengthen my assignment. That's kind of where. So I went from my inquiry stage, the middle stage, they struggled with executive function. And at the end, I really looked at the language that I used when it comes to their performance. And so I'll tell you a little bit how I went from there. But me exploring about what might be wrong took me 30 minutes to do before I acted at all. And so when I was doing this, sometimes you kind of get a little like timely things that just happen. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen probably this report, and there's plenty of other reports out there about this future work report that Microsoft produced. But within it, as I was going through it, they really talked about, there's a couple lines, but the one I wanted to talk about here is AI might act as a bicycle for the mind, boosting output, initially narrowing inequality by automating routine work. As AI advances, human judgment becomes increasingly critical. Recognizing improvement opportunities and selecting the right action under ambiguity, areas tied to context, ethics, and creativity where AI struggles. And what that meant for me is I need to give my students a chance to practice this. How are we going to be expecting them to be able to make these kinds of judgment calls if I don't give them a chance to practice within our own field, within my own class? And so this report just really helped me reinforce that I have to think about AI as a workflow and that the human part that's coming in is the judgment. And how do those two things tangle with each other? How do those two things dance? So, going into what I then did, I went into action mode. I thought at the beginning of the unit, one of my things that my students struggle, and I don't know if this is your guys' issue, but they struggled with the inquiry stage. My students, so in order for them to make sound professional judgment, I need students to be in control of their exploration. In order for that to happen, they need to ask questions. And one of the things about it is, I don't know about you guys, but my students are not very good at asking questions. Besides, can I get an example? That's usually what my students are asking me. And so what I do is I already do this process, but I want to show you how I easily infused AI as a way to enhance it that I think has played out pretty well. So there's this formula technique that basically gives your students a chance to practice asking questions. So I think they're not good at asking questions because they've constantly been conditioned to get the answer and not necessarily be in charge of their exploration. And it's like, well, how do I get my students to be better at asking questions? Well, I do this technique that is through the Right Question Institute. And when you get the webinar, you can just click on this icon and it'll give you the sheet of how you can do it and the steps yourself. But basically, this is how it goes. So you go in and you have a focus prompt, right? And so my case is like, what should they notice when they're in the classroom observing, students in this environment, right? So that's the statement I put. And you can do this at the beginning of a unit, beginning of a section or a topic, just a statement about your topic. And then what I do is I divide students into small groups to develop questions, and I make them put their phones away. And then what they do is before they start formulating questions, I give them a couple rules. I give them a rule like, you have to write questions, you have to number them and write them in order exactly as it's stated. They do not stop and discuss or judge or answer the questions. This is not story time. We're just writing questions. If somebody does make a statement, they have to convert it into a question. And I don't let them stop until they get a minimum of 12 questions. And the reason I picked this random number of 12, if it was up to them, they would stop at 4. And this lesson of the value of keep going has a lot more, as we go. So they go through that process, and the first time you do this, will take a minute. And then we go through this idea of like, well, how do you improve questions? What's the difference between an open-ended question and a closed-ended question? And we practice flipping questions to see how it changes the dynamic of the conversation and the exploration from simply going from a what to a how, right? And then what I do is I then have them prioritize their top questions. So you've listed 12 questions. I want you to pick your top 3. And the big lesson here is that they realize that their best questions are not typically at the beginning. Their best questions tend to be at the end when I force them to kind of go down the line a little bit. And so I already do this. And you're like, where's the AI, Samra? Well, this is where I decided to infuse AI into their inquiry stage. So once the group has selected their top 3, 4 questions, then they're assigned each question. And I tell them, you need to go find the answer via perplexity. Okay. I want you to use this specific AI because most of them will go to ChatGPT if I don't expose them to a different platform. So then I tell them, go to Perplexity. And then I also tell them, you need to verify this by including information literacy. And so we talk about, how is it current? How is it relevant? Who's got the authority? And so what I did is I infused AI as a sense of exploration, but it didn't hijack their questions for them. It actually just was a complement. Then they come back the next day and they share out their answers with their small group, and then we compare. And so they go away from thinking AI is, something just to be taken as literal to it being scrutinized. And it's like they're comparing notes of what they found. And we said, who was the authority of this article? Why would you believe that, author? So it became and it was an existing exercise, but I infused AI into it. And it was honestly a 10-minute change that really changed the dynamic of this whole thing. So the middle of my unit for this whole thing is for this class that they have to do. So the thing is they go from theory to then application. So one of the big things they have to do is they have to go and do a field visit and they have to see learning in action and how you modify teaching strategies according to exceptionalities that are happening in the classroom. The whole thing itself is they have to coordinate the visit. That whole thing is daunting for them. That means they have to get a background check. They have to contact the principal. They have to get into a classroom. They have to find a student. They have to get parental permission slip before they can observe them. Then they observe. Then they interview. Then they make the notes. Like it's scaffolded. And we know that scaffolding is a good practice. But we do know that they also get overwhelmed at the idea of like all these things that they have to do. And so individually, they're perfectly capable of doing every single step, but because it was a long drawn out experience, they were just feeling frazzled by the whole experience. So it wasn't the assignment, it was the degree of like how much we had to go. And so what I decided to do is I created a new assignment that basically helped them with their executive functioning skills, specifically with their time management. They were terrible at this. They were always reactionary. They're always turning it in right before. And instead of just saying, here, create me a weekly plan, what I first did is I told them, give me your real life factors before you create me a personalized plan. And so I asked them, like, sometimes I have baseball players in my class. Your spring schedule is going to influence what you do. Do they have family responsibilities? I have some of mine are parents with children. I even talk about what are some procrastination? Like, your procrastination, like, habits, what are they? So I first had them write out the details of their own like real life factors. And then I go in and then I guided them on the AI prompt because I realized they still don't know how to use it very well, nor do they know how to prompt it very well. And so I basically gave them some parameters. I'm a first year college student. I have to complete this thing. And I basically tell them in yellow, fill it out. Here's the due date. Here's the observation. And then the key is, here's what my life looks like right now. And I asked them to paste their information from the first one. So instead of getting a weekly plan that's basically 25 of the same thing, I now have a very customized weekly plans according to their own realities of work, family responsibilities, of whatever that might be. And so this really helped them manage their time, which I felt like was something that AI helped, but it didn't really replace anything. It just helped them kind of think about what they needed to do. And the last thing that I did was I really wanted to talk about the language that I was using. And one of the things and this was from my third prompt that I gave you guys the example, was I use a grading rubric. Nothing revolutionary here, people. Nothing groundbreaking, right? We all know what rubrics are, and we know that there's strengths and limitations to them. And I think the problem with my rubric was it was becoming a bit long, so they're like, nah, I don't want to read that. And then I didn't like the words that I used to describe their performance. I didn't like that. And so I didn't go in and just paste my rubric into AI and say, fix my rubric. Like that's not going to do very much for me. I focused on the style of rubric that I wanted. And so I focused on the language that I wanted to be using in my rubric development. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to go from deficit, here's all the things that you didn't include, to here's where you're at, here are your assets. So I went in and did an asset-based rubric for it, meaning I want my rubric to focus on what they're able to do, focuses on I can statements, and I don't know it yet, to reinforce this idea of growth mindset. And so what I did in this is I uploaded the following things. This is thanks to Kevin again. So great, Kevin. But what I did is I took a peer-reviewed article that I found that talks about this. I found a blog that kind of talked about it in a more casual way, more digestible. I put in my existing rubric and my assignment directions into Notebook LM. I put all those things because Notebook LM confines it and only evaluates based off the resources. And then I said, revise this rubric in a manner that reflected what I wanted the tone to be. So I'm trying to go away. If I say learning is a process, if learning is, and I want to see it, I need to reflect language that represents that. And so I use Notebook LM to revamp my rubric in a way that I think is more beneficial to our students. So those are the things that I did. And just a couple big takeaways for everybody is This whole thing took me about an hour and a half to do. So from exploration to making these little tweaks, took me about an hour and a half to do. And then the second takeaway that I would hope you would get from this, at least from my talk, is that I recognize that like this is one class, this is one assignment in their life of busy things that they're doing. And one of my goals always is to design learning experiences that are relevant and that are genuinely like going to support their future career. So when I thought about this is like for my students, learning how to ask the right questions, timely questions, is an important skill set they're going to need in the field. Them learning how to manage their time, with designing lesson plans, they need to learn how to do that. And then how to evaluate AI sources, it's a skill set that they're all going to need when they're future teachers. And I need them to give them chances to practice those things with me before they're asked to do that. So I think the key is to be intentional with the design choices. Don't jump into fixing things right away. Take time to reflect on it and, to remember not to use AI to, obviously to replace their thinking, but how it might complement them. So that's my spiel for how you might redesign an assignment and how that journey went for me. And then I'm going to take it over so Nick can show you guys how we went about designing a whole new assignment for his accounting class.
Thanks, Samra. Um, so Samra found out about this activity that I run in my accounting class, and asked me to participate. Um, and so I'm just going to share a little bit about how I developed the activity. This is the third semester that I've used this, and I use it as a review activity before their first exam. So, see if we can move forward here. There we go. Um, so a couple of things. Accounting is a very um, technical industry, I guess. And so all of the things that they're doing there's a certain process that they have to follow. And so we have what's called the accounting cycle, and they have to go through all of these stages and conceptually, once you figure it out, it makes sense, but there's no application in the classroom when I first started teaching this. And so um, part of what I was trying to figure out is how can I make this more real life and whatnot. And so this image here is kind of one of what their assignments look like. And so they fill out these journal entries, and it's useful, but again, it doesn't really help them to apply it in a real world scenario. Um, so basically what I did, I'm doing a PhD through ISU in instructional design and technology, and I took a learning theories course. And each week we went over a different learning theory. We had to develop an assignment with that learning theory in mind. And so the week that we did Gibson's ecological approach to learning, our instructor um, wanted us to come up with an activity, and she wanted us to use AI to develop the activity. And so I'm going to show that initial assignment. We had to do a write-up on it and everything. And I remember putting down, I could use this in my class, and I probably will. And so this basically started with me doing a gallery walk and trying to bridge those concepts to something more experiential, and a more real world application. So this is what the AI output essentially came up with some prompting. We were taught how to prompt it and to get the activity that we wanted. And so um, my learning objectives were kind of set, and so I used that in order to prompt the AI, and it came up with this simulated business environment, um, where we had the students doing actual accounting transactions. And so it first started as kind of a gallery walk, and they'd go to each wall and have an accounting transaction that they then had to analyze and record in different ways. And so we took them through the whole accounting process doing that. Um, so what I really wanted them to achieve with this, and I built on this activity, was something very real world. And so I've added things each semester using the AI to prompt it. So I've mostly used ChatGPT for this. I've used a little bit of Claude AI in order to build this into something really, really useful. And so my initial prompt, I asked for generation of business transactions. That was the main thing I was using the AI for, is to develop the actual transactions and things. I also took what ChatGPT, the output from ChatGPT, and I used that within Claude in order to get my source document. So on the right here, you'll see the Station 5 dividends declared. I used that prompt and pulled it into Claude AI to actually create the source document that went along with that. And I'll show some examples of how that developed. So um, this kind of turned it in from a worksheet activity, which they're used to in their homework assignments and whatnot, into more of a simulation. And so this is one of the outputs from Claude AI, the source document. So this is a payment voucher. It gave me really good information. And so they have to use this information in order to record that transaction on an accounting tracker. The journal entry posting to the ledger. They have to put it into a financial statement and whatnot from there. These are a couple others, and so with the AI, I'm a big backpacker, hiker, anything outdoors, and so tried to use something that fit me. Um, I've had some family and friends say I have mountain goat legs, so I use that as kind of a theme, and use the AI to generate a logo as well. I think that one came from ChatGPT. That one's rather recent, but again, Claude gave me these source documents that they were able to use in analyzing those. And so they interpreted the transactions, they recorded journal entries, and they're participating in something real world at that point. And so this last semester, I generated a few other things using the AI. So I didn't get these posted, but I might get in trouble with the FBI because of the way I prompted the AI at first, but I wanted a check. So we got a fake check for them that they had to analyze, $1,000 bills, things like that, um, that were that were helpful in adding to the realism of the activity. And then the other thing that I did is, we've got a lab that we have 3D printers in our building, and um, we put together they're hooks for camping, so you can hang them from your tent and whatnot, and hang shoes and dry clothes and everything. And so there were different parts to this. And so with the help of ChatGPT and through prompting, I gave each group one of the parts, and they had to sell back and forth between the other groups and record those transactions as well. Um, I included we got some other things that we did. There's a Ford F-150 that they had to um, purchase as part of their transaction. And so we 3D printed just supplies and other things to go along with the activity. And so they would have to come to me as the instructor, as I acted as the bank and the salesman and their insurance agent and those things. And they would have to come to me and exchange monopoly money to get their supplies and to get their truck. And I provided them with some additional source documents as well that Claude spit out for me. And so it just increased the realism of the activity. So this is kind of a breakdown of the accounting cycle. There's really there's 10 steps in there. I'm missing a couple, but they put together and go through this whole cycle. And that cycle is something that we use throughout the rest of the semester. So this first 4 weeks, we're really focused on understanding that. And this activity really allowed them to put that into practice. And so here's some pictures of the recent, um, I recently did this, I think a week or two ago. And so they're in groups and you can see some of the parts um, to the hanger that they had to sell. And so there's some negotiation going on here. You can see some of the supplies and their money and some of their source documents there. Just more of the same here. And they had a really good time. A few of them came up to me and were trying to negotiate some of the prices on their supplies and things. And so it made it kind of a fun environment as well. But really, they were really engaged. And initially, this activity took me one class period when I first started. And again, it was just kind of a gallery walk. And it's now taking me three class periods to get through the whole thing, which in my mind is valuable because it's very applicable and it's something that they have to understand or they're going to struggle the rest of the semester. So I don't mind spending that time, but again, just some images of their different parts and their supplies. Um, and we've got a student coming up to negotiate with me and pay me or something like that there. But this is the tracker. I didn't use the AI for this because I had something a little more specific than what it could give me in mind. And so they record all of their entries and every step of the accounting cycle on these documents. And then they turn that in at the end. Um, and throughout the activity, they're checking with me to make sure that their entries are correct, in order to move on to additional steps. And so this is kind of that assessment piece of this whole activity. So making sure that they understand where things need to go, how they need to do the journal entries and whatnot. So I use this to generate the artifacts, the source documents and whatnot, to scale up the realism. So I've got a ChatGPT chat, I guess, that has been ongoing for the last year and a half. And so I just reference old things, make updates. There's a few things that I'll be adding as well. But I'm not using it to complete those accounting tasks, but um, it helped me to align it with experiential learning theory as well, as that ecological approach. And so I really try to build that into my courses. I'm not an accountant, and so I don't want to be the stereotypical boring accountant teacher. So I try to make it as hands-on as possible and applicable. So it created a really authentic assessment and activity for them to actually learn how to do accounting rather than just being able to do a worksheet. And so a couple of things that I'll be adding, and some of this came from feedback from my students. One specifically was having fillable invoices and receipts for when they make their exchanges for different parts. And so I'll be doing that next semester probably. I'm going to add a requirement that they have an accounts receivable with the other group. So essentially, they're going to promise to pay the other group without actually giving them cash. I'm going to add a loan component as well. And then I've been using this framework to adapt it for my upper level accounting course. So we're going to use some of the same things using the 3D printed hanger to do job costing, process costing, and activity-based costing. That's kind of in its infancy. We're supposed to guinea pig it with my students tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of what the future holds for this activity, and I love using the AI to help me just kind of act on the ideas that I have, and it speeds things up. In addition to that, I just thought I'd share just some of the other things that I've used different AI systems to develop activities. So um, I'm on my third time of doing an escape room activity that I put together that's all Iron Man, Tony Stark, Stark Industries based. And we focus on interpersonal and team communication. That's for my business communications course. For my online students, I actually use Notebook LM, and I took all of my source documents for the course and I generated 3 podcasts that they have to listen to and then they discuss. We just did that for the first time, and my students did really well with that. Um, Packback is another AI tool that I'm using, and that's where they do their discussion posts and their writing assignments. So it gives them real-time feedback on those. Really interesting tool. But one of the cool things about Notebook LM and the podcast too is within the podcast system, you can actually call into the podcast and it'll respond to your question, which is pretty interesting. But I think that was everything I have. I think that'll do it, Samra.
Yes, you guys, that's all we got for now. We're welcome to field any questions. We would love for you to, I'll put the survey actually in the chat box if we could copy that real quick. Just to get your guys' feedback if you like this, if you want to hear something else, we really take your thoughts and your opinions in account whenever we plan for the next one. So any questions, you're welcome to ask.
I just asked in the chat about Nick's experiences with Packback. I was curious about how the students were responding to that. I got to see a demo and I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, for my writing assignments, it's really nice because it checks grammar, but the students also see that beforehand. That's what I'm using it mostly for. I might be kind of weird for this, but I'm not a huge discussion board person. I don't really want to read them, and I don't like doing them as a student, so I don't use a lot of them. But this last podcast that we did, there's AI built into the Packback that kind of helps them to generate valuable content. So they get what's called a curiosity score, and it kind of gives them feedback as far as did you go in depth enough? Was your question, really well thought out? Because they ask a question rather than just submitting a post. So it's a little different discussion than your typical discussion board. I really like it for that reason. But it has so many components of just using AI appropriately to elevate your writing and improving it, and it gives them really good feedback on that. So we have a lot of instructors that are using it right now, and I think it's pretty well liked within our building at least.
Any other thoughts, questions that you maybe want to bring out there for the rest of the group? We've got you stumped. Well, please, I put in the chat box, I put in the survey. So if you could just take 2-3 minutes of your time to let us know what you thought of this session and what you'd like to see more of. It really helps us, to make sure that we have relevant trainings, show and tells, so that, it fits your needs itself. Okay, well, if you don't have any questions, the time is yours. I'm sure you probably have a meeting in 10 minutes or a class, and so feel free to just say thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Yeah, I've got a class in a couple minutes too, so I'm like, all right. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Okay. Joel, I'm thinking we're probably pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. That was awesome.
Okay, sounds good. I'm sure you'll be sending out all the slides and all that fun stuff too. So
Yeah, I'll make sure that I'll probably send out a batch of the last three, this one, including this one, the most recent three
Okay,
webinars.
perfect.
So,
Well,
yep,
thanks for being here at that airport. We appreciate it.
yep. Hey, Nick, thanks so much for being part of this. I really appreciate it. You kind of walked through there. That's great.
Yeah, of course, we're happy to share, even the thinking process, how it's done. So thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.